Hey everyone, Chaps here, and I just returned from a 2-week trip to New Zealand. Outside of a few cruises and a couple one-day trips to Canada, I've never really traveled internationally, so this was a eye-opening experience for me. Driving was a huge part of this trip. There was only one day that I didn't drive, and most days I was driving 3 to 4, 5 hours in a day. So yeah, very, very new experience for me. So let's cover a few things. What was it like? How hard was it to adapt? What rules of the road stood out to me? And what other observations did I have? And before we get too deep into those, I just gotta call out, wow, this country is beautiful. From the rolling green hills on the North Island to the mountain passes on the South Island, when you're driving, there's just such a variety of terrain and it's really cool to see. But now for our first question, what was it like? In the US, the driver sits on the left and we drive on the right side of the road. In New Zealand, the driver sits on the right and we drive on the left side of the road. And yeah, that's a pretty daunting change. I'll say I got the hang of things pretty quickly. It certainly helped that our first rental car had a lane departure warning. Near the start it kept beeping that I was drifting too far over to the left, but eventually it calmed down and I guess I was doing pretty well. Honestly, it was the turns that really got me at the start. Most driving was on the highways, which was fine, but when actually turning into back roads and stuff, that's where I really had to pay attention about turning into the left lane. What took me a bit longer was getting used to the turn signal. Being that we're on the other side of the car, the turn signal and windshield wipers are flipped as well. For the first few days, I was constantly turning on my windshield wipers, like even on a sunny day, when I'm trying to turn. So it wasn't really that hard to adapt to driving there. But what about the rules of the road? Did anything stand out there? Yes, yes they did. First off, holy traffic circles, Batman. These are pretty rare in the US, and whenever I get to one, it always seems like some of the drivers are confused. In New Zealand, they are extremely common, and people seem pretty good about the etiquette there. Honestly, given the number of tourists, that's kind of surprising that people are using them properly, but yeah, it seems like a majority of the intersections are just traffic circles. This is especially true on highways, where you require something a bit more substantial than just stop signs on the crossing roads. And I guess that gets into the next one, which is these give way signs, the equivalent of a yield sign in the US. These are everywhere. Lots of places that would have a stop sign in the US are replaced with these give way signs. And if I'm being honest, most people in the US aren't coming to a complete stop at a stop sign anyways, so everything is basically a yield or give way sign here anyways. So let's hit on the lines on the road. Most roads in New Zealand have a solid white line on the shoulder and a dashed white line between lanes. And yes, when I say between lanes, I'm even talking about 2-lane multi-direction roads. It's a white line between oncoming traffic. This took me quite a while to get used to, as I usually expect a yellow line between your lane and the oncoming lane. I'm used to a solid yellow line meaning no passing, and a dashed yellow line means passing is allowed. Here, the dashed white line allows passing. A solid white line is pass with caution. A dashed yellow line indicates that a solid yellow line is coming up, and then the solid yellow line is that you're not allowed to cross it. It's like, I get that you want lines to differentiate if passing is allowed, but why make it this 4-tier system? Am I just ignorant? America seems to have it pretty simplified here. Dashed yellow equals passing, solid yellow equals no passing. And most importantly, white lines are between lanes in the same direction. Having white lines separate a 2-way road just seems dangerous to me. When in an area that I wasn't familiar with, it was sometimes hard to tell where each side of the road started. Luckily, they do have a bunch of these blue and white arrows, and a lot of arrows painted on the roads. They're actually, everywhere. We have some like them in America, but they're just super common here in New Zealand, probably due to the lack of clear lane direction due to the lines. These passing lines are super important here, because there's a plethora of 2-lane roads, like 1 lane for each direction. You'll often find yourself slowed down by a truck, a bus, or a camper, so finding a place to pass is a must. Luckily, they've implemented these designated passing zones, mostly on uphill sections, similar to what you see in the States, but they're a lot more common here. This allows you to more easily get past a slow vehicle, assuming that a passing lane becomes available. Oh, and they have these slow lanes on the shoulder occasionally, where slow traffic is supposed to pull off in case they're causing people behind them to pile up. It's sort of like a pit stop. So on the topic of passing, something I've noticed here is that a lot of people are following that stay to the left unless passing thing. It's supposed to be like that in the States, except, stay to the right unless passing, but nobody seems to really follow that on the highways. In New Zealand, it seemed like a majority of the people are actually following that rule, and it's working out really well. Okay, here's a big one. Let's talk speed limits. which, yes, they're in kilometers per hour here. Speed limits are typically in multiples of 10, going from 30 for construction zones up to 100 for highways. First off, 30 kilometers is like 18 or 19 miles per hour, which is insanely slow. Nobody actually goes that slowly in a 30 zone. A 50 zone is also typical around construction, and I'll constantly see people still going like 60 or 70 through those. I guess it's similar to in the States where a lot of people are just ignoring the construction zone limit, or at least they don't slow all the way down. I found that sub 80, most people are either going the speed limit or 5 to 10 over. There's not much in between. For the highways, it's usually 80 to 100 kilometers per hour, and I see three groups of people here. Some, mostly tourist and camper vans, are going well under the speed limit, and I guess some trucks and buses get stuck in there as well. Then there's a ton of people going like exactly the speed limit, and lastly there's a group going a pretty consistent like 10 over. It really makes for these three distinct groups. That is, I guess unless we're talking about winding roads. It seems like New Zealand just uses a general 100 speed limit when outside of a town, even if there's no reasonable way to safely drive at that speed. Like some windy areas, you're probably lucky to get 50 or 60, but the speed limit's still 100. These zones can be really fun to drive if you're not stuck behind someone, but you're often going to find yourself stuck behind a stupid, juicy van, or one of those other common camper vans. And man, these vans are the bane of my existence at this point. It is so annoying to get stuck behind them. They turn these fun, windy roads into just a crawl. I will say that most trucks and some buses are actually really good about letting you pass. If you're in a passing zone and there's no oncoming your way, they'll often put on their turn signal and slow down to signal you that it's actually safe to pass. Something else that I noticed on the topic of speed limits is the car speedometer. Maybe this is just a rental car thing, and maybe it's this way in the States, I'm actually not sure. But the speedometer is about 5 kilometers high. So if you are going 50 kilometers per hour, the car's going to say you're going 55 kilometers per hour, which I guess kind of makes sense. They want you to drive a little bit slower in their rental car. I base this based on what Google Maps says, where it tells you what your speed is compared to what the speedometer said. And also there were a lot of those like radar things where it's like looking at you and telling you, hey, slow down, you're going this fast. That was matching what Google Maps was saying, and again, 5 kilometers lower than what the car speedometer was saying. I guess it's just to get tourists to drive a little bit slower and more safely, but I honestly kind of wonder if that's responsible for that group of drivers that I'm seeing that are constantly going below the speed limit. I think the last large aspect of actual road markings and stuff I have to bring up are the one-lane roads, and mostly one-lane bridges. Especially in lower traffic areas, you see plenty of bridges with a marker like this. The red arrow specifies who should yield, and the larger black or sometimes white arrow specifies who has the right of way. It's a decent system, but at the same time, why not just make a two-lane bridge? Are they really saving that much money by doing a one-way bridge? And how many accidents do these cause? Which I guess is actually another interesting point to bring up. In our 2 weeks of driving there, in which I did a lot of driving, especially in tourist areas, I only saw 2 damaged cars on the side of the road. No other accidents. I may have seen one person pulled over from a cop on the side of the road, but I'd say that's a very impressive number, right? 2 accidents over the course of 2 weeks in highly concentrated tourist areas. So yeah, good job, New Zealand. So I have a few other things here that don't really fall into any one category, so I'm just going to go down my list here and hit on them. So the first one is billboards. There aren't very many of them, at least not in the areas that I was driving. There was a couple, but not many, and it was very nice because you're in a very scenic area and you don't want billboards blocking that awesome view. So I love the fact that there were no billboards. The next one is gas stations. You fill up and then you pay inside, or I guess you can pay for a set amount and then fill up. I only found one gas station that actually allowed us to pay with a card outside. Unfortunately, my card didn't work there. I'm guessing it's because it was a foreign card, but I don't know. I still had to go inside on that one. Also, I really struggled with the pump in order to get it to stay on. Like, typically you can pull the pump all the way and it will stay on and you can let go and it will turn off once it's full. But I sort of got that starting to work at one gas station, but all the other ones I couldn't get it to work. Lastly on gas is, wow, it is expensive. It was about $2.50 per liter while I was there. That's $2.50 New Zealand dollars. That's about $9.50 per gallon. New Zealand dollars, and then once you convert it to US dollars, it's $5.77 a gallon. So $2.50 per liter New Zealand is $5.77 a gallon in US dollars. I don't know about you, but we've been closer to like 3, or I think right now it's $3.20 per gallon at home. So New Zealand's quite a bit more expensive for gas. Okay, so this next one's kind of cool, and it's car variety. I mean, it's just absurd. There's brands I've never heard of before, but then even for the brands I've known forever, there's models I've never heard of. From what I understand, New Zealand basically just imports cars from every other country and gets all of these various varieties. It's actually really cool driving around and seeing some of the different models. And last, but certainly not least, is how accurate is Google Maps? This is one of the big questions that I had going into New Zealand. When researching my trip, I kept reading online that I shouldn't trust Google Maps. People kept saying that the roads aren't great and that Google will always underestimate times. Because of this, when I was doing my initial planning, I always added like 30 to 60 minutes as a buffer for any drive. But how was it really? Well, I'm happy to say that the roads were actually very nice, much better than people made them out to be. And Google Maps was very accurate. Being it was long stretches of highway or like curvy back roads everywhere, I was thinking, okay, the straight highways it might get, the curvy back roads where you're definitely not going the speed limit, it might be way off on those. But yeah, even the like back roads that had a speed limit of 100 and we're going like 60 because of the curves, and even when we get stuck behind a stupid juicy van, somehow when the time that Google said we would get there, that was the time we got there. Even for like a 4-hour drive or a 30-minute drive, it didn't matter. It seemed just like the US Google Maps, which somehow accurately predicts your ETA even in when conditions are crazy. I still don't know how they do that. But the one thing about Google Maps that I didn't like is that it was not showing me not my speed limit. It showed me the speed that I was going. It didn't show the speed limit of the road that I was on. That was one thing I kind of miss that I got here in the States. It may have been because Android Auto wasn't working properly. I'm not entirely sure. But there you have it, the American's perspective of driving in New Zealand. The drive is beautiful. It doesn't take that long to get used to the whole wrong side of the road and wrong side of the car type thing. Traffic circles and one-way bridges are a bit interesting, and the lines on the road are like you get used to them, but it's just confusing as to why they went with that system. Overall, I was quite pleased with the experience. My wife did not drive at all, though. She did not want to have any part of that. So if there's something I didn't cover, or if you have any questions about driving in New Zealand, just leave a comment down below, hit me up on Twitter, and I'm usually pretty quick to respond there. If you found this helpful, go ahead and hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to catch more content. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the New Zealand series, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.